Hey, I'm Laura. Just quickly, we here at Grit TV are proud to bring you independently produced content every day. Now it's your chance to help us. Grit TV has been offered a $100,000 challenge grant. Every dollar you give right now between now and June 30th is worth $3 to us. We've only got a few more weeks to meet the match. Will you help? You can donate at our website, grittv.org. Meanwhile, enjoy this clip. First, we could know very soon whether lending comfort to the president's critics can lose you your job in the military's top command. What we already found out this week, from the Supreme Court no less, was that lending assistance, even humanitarian assistance and advice, to groups on the State Department's terror list can land you in jail for a very long time. The Supreme Court ruled on the 12-year-old case of Holder versus Humanitarian Law Project, in effect against a group accused of providing expert advice and training. This comes on top of already controversial material support clauses in the Patriot Act, now speaking to or even possibly allowing a deemed terrorist to speak could be grounds for prosecution. So, will the New York Times be liable for printing op-eds from Hamas, a democratically elected party, lest we forget? Could humanitarian organizations be criminally charged for aiding civilians in places like Gaza? What about the World Cup? If the ANC had never made it off the State Department's terror list, what then? Coming up with us to explain it all and lay out the case, Shana Kadidal will join me. He's Senior Managing Attorney of the Guantanamo Global Justice Initiative at the Center for Constitutional Rights. Here's some news.
It's an easy way to go after a lot of these terror groups to accuse them of and prosecute them for supporting larger terror groups like Al-Qaeda. So it's going to make it much easier in the future for the government.
Which is definitely good news.
We're looking to talk to terrorist organizations to try and talk them into behaving peacefully. One might argue that that would be a futile conversation, and it probably would be. But it should be a protected conversation under the First Amendment. That's not right. That's, I submit, inconsistent with the spirit and the tenor and the meaning of the First Amendment.
Well, Shana, we looked far and wide, and that's the kind of potpourri of the coverage that we found of this case. An important one didn't get, I don't think, the attention it deserves. Just for clarity, because it's not all that clear, the first two voices you hear in that clip are CNN reporters sounding pretty positive about the Supreme Court's decision. The last voice is actually a critic, but he's on Fox. What do you make of how this case actually been discussed? And then we'll get to the decision.
Sure. Well, I think, in a lot of the discussion, people don't really understand what kind of assistance our plaintiffs wanted to give. They weren't talking about sending, guns or money or things like that are clearly fungible, where, a terrorist group could use $1 that you donated for humanitarian purposes or for violence. They were talking about going to these groups and trying to dissuade them from using violence, trying to get them to turn away from terrorism, trying to teach them nonviolent dispute resolution techniques for their political problems and train them in human rights law and that kind of thing.
And the media's kind of missing that part of it?
Absolutely. The Supreme Court's decision yesterday said that Congress can make that a crime. It can make it a crime to encourage a terrorist group to turn away from violence. And they basically premised this decision on two things. They said that might free up money somehow that the terrorist group could turn to use to fund their violence, and that it somehow conveys legitimacy that you're even talking to them. So you can say in public that groups should use violence generally, but if you say it to a group, that association is what the Supreme Court said yesterday is a problem.
How does this week's decision at the Supreme Court change the status quo, which was already pretty clearly stacked against those deemed to be providing material support to terrorist groups under the Patriot Act?
Right. Well, Congress had revised this statute a number of times, in part because we had won so many times in the lower courts. 6 times since 1998, the lower courts had said that terms like providing services or expert advice are so broad that they sweep in all sorts of lawful activity, like the kinds of things that our plaintiffs wanted to do. And that because they were so broad, it gives just too much discretion to prosecutors to single out people for political reasons and prosecute them for those, invalid motives. So what happened yesterday was essentially the Supreme Court swept away all those lower court decisions and said, no, the political branches pretty much have unlimited power to go after people for speaking to terrorist groups.
And are my scenarios completely paranoid? The New York Times publishing something by Hamas, if the ANC was still in charge in South Africa and had never made it off the terror list, we wouldn't be able to go to the World Cup?
Absolutely. I mean, you know, one of the interesting examples is that President Carter actually submitted an amicus brief in this case and talked about how in 2006 he had gone to do election monitoring in Lebanon and had spoken to all the political parties, including Hamas and Hezbollah, which are on these lists, and told them, look, this is what the international standards are for fair elections. This is what I'm going to be doing as an election monitor. All those kind of things are crimes now under the letter of the material support statute.
Hold it right there. We have an image, a piece of footage of Jimmy Carter doing exactly that. Take a look.
The Hamas leaders want peace, and they want to have reconciliation, not only with their Fatah brothers, but also eventually with Israelis to live side by side with two nations, both sovereign nations, recognized by each other.
Are you telling me that when Jimmy Carter came back from that trip, he could have been clamped in irons and taken off to jail?
Well, under the Supreme Court's new decision, certainly he could have.
Does this decision have implications for things like the Gaza flotilla, that kind of thing?
Oh, surely. You know, this was all about speech, the decision from the Supreme Court, and things like actually bringing humanitarian aid into crisis zones. That wasn't even something that there was a question about whether or not the government could stop you from doing that.
So even if you're bringing comfort, so-called, to civilian groups living in contested territory or living under a regime they may never have voted for, never had a good word to say about, they could still be criminalized?
Yes. I mean, half of our plaintiffs here wanted to do humanitarian aid in parts of Sri Lanka where the de facto government was the Tamil Tiger organization, which is on the list, and to do any sort of humanitarian aid, to bring medical services, to bring food into this area that was ravaged by the Civil War and then doubly ravaged by the tsunami in 2004. You'd have to deal with the de facto government on the ground. And so many people, really tragic in the wake of the tsunami, couldn't go there and bring their expert skills to help the civilian population. And think about what happened in Haiti with doctors going down there after the earthquake. All of that sort of thing is banned.
Is there any chance that with the new appointments to the Supreme Court, any of this could change? What do we know, for example, about the positions of Elena Kagan?
Well, I suppose we don't really know anything about what she actually believes, but she argued this case for the government. And, you know, one of the amazing things that she said during the argument was that submitting an amicus brief, a friend of the court brief in a case, could land you on the wrong side of this law. So let's say an organization is challenging whether it even belongs on the terrorism list, and you, an outside party, come in and say, I think, you know, they're right, they don't belong on the list. You could be prosecuted for providing material support.
Could you be prosecuted for doing the work that you do?
Well, that's the interesting question. The Supreme Court was very interested in this. A lot of the justices asked her questions about it. And what she said was, if you have a constitutional right to be vindicated in court, then you're entitled to have a lawyer represent you. The lawyer isn't providing services to you, you know, a terrorist organization. And, you know, the lawyer can't get in trouble for that. But when you think about the Guantanamo litigation, it took us 7 or 8 years to establish that there was any constitutional right to get into court and challenge your detention as a quote-unquote enemy combatant. So all of us lawyers involved with this work could have been risking our necks.
Shana Kadidals with the Center for Constitutional Rights. We'll link to their website and their work at ours. That's grittv.org. Thanks for coming in, Shana.